Hello everyone, my name is CJ and I'm your teacher at FUNDAY. And today I have a very special guest who is our academic trainer who is responsible for training our English teacher at FUNDAY. And we have been working for quite a while, right? So Jenna,
almost 2 years, yeah.
Almost 2 years, right? Time flies.
Yes.
Would you like to briefly introduce yourself a little bit to our audience, maybe?
Sure. My name is Jenna, and I have been a teacher for over 20 years now. So that means I have worked in a lot of different settings, mostly these days business English and teacher training. But in the past, I've worked in junior high schools, and I've taught literacy, and I've also taught immigrants in the United States.
I see. So when did you move to Taiwan and start your educational career?
2006.
2006. That was
yes.
quite a long time ago,
It
actually.
Before that, I lived in China, and I also did some teaching in the U.S.
I see.
Yeah.
So from my understanding and judging from our collaboration experience, that right now you mainly focus on training English teacher. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly.
What exactly is the concept of teacher training, if I may ask?
Sure. The main idea is that a lot of people have this false conception that being a native speaker is what makes a teacher. Like all that matters is that you're a native speaker, and that's actually not true. First, plenty of native speakers are not necessarily, I don't want to say not masters of their own language, but if they were to take the IELTS, they might not get a 9. Maybe they're not particularly good writers or strong speakers in like a communicative way, even though, of course, they're fully fluent. And they might not know how to explain certain elements of the language to learners.
I see.
That is teaching, and anybody who does teacher training has the potential to be a great teacher. What your native language is actually doesn't matter, as long as your level is maybe a couple of bands above the students that you're working with. And that's all of the classroom management, how to explain grammar or meaning clearly, how to check understanding, give clear instructions. Timing is really important.
I see.
Just how to plan a lesson that makes sense and achieves its goals. Yeah.
I think that is a very important idea, not just for us, but also maybe for viewers out there to understand that the thing that you just said, being native or being a first language user, of course, is maybe giving you a win at the beginning. Yeah. But you still have to be trained to be able to teach and to be a great teacher, right? So during the collaboration, these 2 years, we have always talked about how to teach in context. Even though that is an idea that perhaps teachers who have been trained traditionally in a conventional way probably wouldn't know. What exactly does that mean? Because I do want to bring that idea up front to our audience as well, not just for our teachers, for our students to understand what exactly is learning English in context.
Sure. One of the main focuses here would be authentic materials and authentic learning. So a lot of traditional classroom settings, there's a textbook and it's very fake, right? It's very
Very fake.
Fake, like surface level. Maybe there are dialogues, but they don't sound like anybody actually speaks.
That is true. So that brings me, it reminds me of something that I get quite frequently recently, that is training with AI. Because I have seen quite many advertisements, because some apps, they are just pushing their promotion like really hard. And the examples that the advertisement is giving out, I feel like, well, do we really speak in that way? I mean, I don't speak in that way with my friends in any way. So, it's hard to say, because it's in Taiwan, we don't really have that many aspects. Like for at least that is not a resource that everyone can access, I feel.
Oh, sure, yeah. When I did my master's and when I did my Delta, we spent a lot of time on natural language. Like, what does language actually sound like when real people use it? For example, descriptive grammar, which is describing the grammar that real speakers use, rather than prescriptive, which is like what the book says. And the issue with AI from a linguistic perspective, because I do have some linguistics training, is that it's very florid. What that means is very like overly flowery and adopts almost the same tone regardless of the situation. But anybody who knows anything about language in discourse, discourse is kind of everything beyond the sentence, how sentences connect logically, what kind of language you choose within the situation where you are using it, and how to take turns in a conversation, tone, like how formal or informal to be. And AI simply isn't there unless you sort of program it to do that. And I think a lot of those which advertise language learning with AI, they don't necessarily think about this. So,
or maybe they are just not yet there.
Yeah.
Maybe one day.
Maybe one day.
Maybe one day.
Perhaps. But you also need talented professionals behind the scenes to sort of program the AI to do that. AI can be used in language learning, but it's for things like maybe checking your grammar, like responding to your questions. But if it's the only input, it's not going to sound very human. Like I can tell when an answer is AI. When I see writing, for example, I can tell when it's AI. When I see those like TikTok videos, I can tell when it's AI. It's just not quite there yet. So what you're learning is also just not perfectly natural. Yeah.
We have to say that there's definitely some value in AI learning or learning with AI, but perhaps just like what we said, it's not yet that humane.
Exactly.
not human.
Yeah,
not
exactly.
human enough.
Exactly.
We can actually just think back to when we were being trained in writing in Chinese.
Yeah.
At least from my experience when I was in high school, because you also remind me of a description of the way that we are being trained. That is, we need to write very florally.
Yes.
We have to use all of the beautiful words, big words, and some very complicated structure.
Yeah.
To make sure that we get higher scores. So I feel like a lot of students, they are used to this way of training. So when they get trained in that way, they will speak probably, I don't know how to describe it.
Yeah. It doesn't translate into a natural way of speaking for sure.
Okay.
So basically, even in writing, I would recommend to my learners, for example, if you need to write an email, especially if it's a bit sensitive, you want to hit the right tone, you can ask AI to draft that email for you, but you need to check it. What a lot of students neglect is that double checking, or they don't know what to check for, so they don't realize like how unnatural it actually sounds. Then when you translate that to speaking, in fact, one of the big pitfalls of traditional language learning with the memorizing and the sentence patterns is a lot of what's chosen is what might work in writing, but is not how we actually speak.
It's not the natural way of communication, probably. Yeah. So that brings us to the focus of this episode. That is, how can we teach or learn with some context, like authentic English usage, right? So normally, how do you train your teachers to achieve that particular goal maybe in a classroom setting? Or maybe how do you tell your students that this might be a better way for learning English?
Okay. Sure. When talking to teachers, what we often do is a little demo lesson of whatever we're learning that day. Maybe it's how to give instructions, how to incorporate vocabulary into your lesson. And I try to choose authentic materials, something from the real world, which I may have modified to make them more accessible to learners, or something that we call like simulated authentic materials, which are meant to seem as real as possible and lead to real discussion. Because you could say authentic is not necessarily the text or the listening that they're doing. It could be the discussion or the activity that they have after that, which is something like what they would do in the real world. But the more real world stuff you use, even if you modify it to make it more accessible, the more natural your language is going to sound.
I see.
So I kind of show this to teachers and show them in your lessons, if you're always focusing on a grammar point or a sentence pattern and not on building the skill of speaking, the skill of writing fluently, the skill of reading more quickly, you're not building that fluency, which is a part of authenticity.
I see.
In terms of learning, I tell my learners, you can use like the flashcards, the apps that help you with a review. those are important, but you also need to engage with some kind of authentic language. And this should be mostly understandable to you. This is really difficult because if you are an adult learner, but your level is maybe high beginner or low intermediate, there's not a lot of real world material out there for you.
Maybe in Taiwan, that is true.
In the world.
In the world.
Yeah. So I'm learning a couple of different languages, and one of them is Taiwanese, like Daigi. There's not a lot of authentic Taiwanese content at my level. I'd consider myself a low beginner. I can communicate basic things, but not much beyond that. There are plenty of dramas. There's even a podcast. There are things out there in Taiwanese.
Probably it's already above B2.
Yes. And it's not that I can listen to it to get a knack for the pronunciation, the intonation, the ups and the downs of how people speak, so I can imitate that and have strong pronunciation. It's good for remembering tones. But in terms of comprehension, there's not a lot. And that makes it very hard for me to find good, authentic material to engage with.
I think that is also the case for English learners in
Yes.
Taiwan, maybe even in FUNDAY as well,
Yeah.
right? Because even though we have a lot of pre-existing live conversation materials,
Yeah.
but that is only in one classroom, right? And we still need to hit some of the like grammar or structural or systematic points.
Yeah.
And for students to access what you mentioned, like the authentic resources, materials, is actually really hard.
Yeah.
Especially in your daily life. Maybe you come to one class and you forget about it later in minutes, right?
Yeah.
And to bridge the students from like low beginners to maybe a higher intermediate level with authentic context or authentic learning materials, how would you suggest the teachers and maybe the learners to do? Whether they are learning with a provider like FUNDAY or maybe whether they are learning by themselves?
Sure. I would say first for teachers, the main focus, certainly you do have to hit grammar and vocabulary points, but you want to make sure that your grammar and vocabulary points are sort of reduced to something that can be picked up within like the class. A lot of untrained teachers maybe try to teach too much in one class, and then most of the class is focused on explaining that grammar point. What you want is something digestible, and then a much bigger chunk of the class focused on language in use. That could be a reading, or it could be speaking practice. Preferably it's both, right?
Yeah.
Excuse me. Preferably it's both. And the main amount of time I think teachers should really spend on prepping their lessons is to find or modify authentic content or create authentic like content that puts all of this in a context.
I see.
If that makes sense. And then take whatever, let's say, for example, you want learners to get more familiar with present perfect. Well, you can't do that in 50 minutes. You want to take like one use of the present perfect, make sure that's clear, and then practice, practice, practice. For the learners, that one is tough because for English, there is a lot of what we call graded material out there. And that means material which is created for learners at their level, but it's not that interesting. Yeah. And the bigger thing, I do say comprehending most of what you are, the input, most of what you're reading or listening to is important. But even more important than that is that you are interested in it. And that can be really hard to find. This is why I tell learners, have a goal, right? Watch that movie you want to watch in English with subtitles, but make it your goal that maybe by the end of the year, you'll watch it without them. Plan a trip. Maybe you're not going to take the trip this year, but start planning that trip and using English to plan the trip to an English-speaking country. I know this is very trite and normal advice, but like try to make foreign friends. The key here is to make real foreign friends and not just sort of
Who can speak with you in an authentic way, maybe.
Yeah, but like people you genuinely like, because otherwise, I mean, you could pay for a language exchange partner for sure, but it should be someone you enjoy talking to.
That is true, because if you are just talking to a person who is paid, probably there will be a different agenda. So that makes the conversation a bit less authentic, I assume.
It might. It depends on what you sort of tell them when you talk about what you want to accomplish in that class. Yeah. The main issue I find with language exchange is that often the idea is an exchange, so you're not paying, but you're supposed to do some in your language and some in theirs.
Yes.
So you're both practicing, but whoever has the stronger language ability, that's the language that tends to dominate.
I see.
Yeah.
And I do something that you mentioned, which is setting a goal for the learners. I think is very important. But to my experience, the way I helped or suggest my students that how can you make watching an English movie or English TV series effective for your English learning, not just for your entertainment.
Yeah.
I can connect it back to the present perfect example that you mentioned, because present perfect is something that is, I think, quite hard for a beginner, maybe like low intermediate level learners to master. And I will probably suggest them to try to capture every single usage of present perfect tense in a series and to see, or probably to imitate, or to see why they use it in that way. Maybe try to think of another example that they probably can replicate the same situation. Would you think that is a good idea?
You can do that. I wouldn't do that on the first watching for sure.
Yes.
Because then you lose the interest. It just like it's kind of like.
Oh yeah, that is a bit contradictory, right? So if you want to keep your interest, you have to watch it all the way through.
Yeah.
But if you stop it, then that has become a learning material and it's not that fun anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's kind of like I tell my learners when reading a book, don't try to understand every word, because if you're checking every single word, then it's no longer fun to read, and then you won't read as a hobby. But we do know that the main thing that builds fluency is lots and lots of input, whether that's listening or reading. Huge amounts of authentic input is the key to fluency. I'd say you can do that if you want to watch it again and if you're dedicated to it, but simply noticing, and I put noticing in quotes because that's actually a language teaching term, like noticing that it's been used.
You're aware that it is there.
Exactly.
But you don't need to like drill into it properly.
Exactly. Yeah. Because you noticed it's there and you understood it in context. And if you have that flood of input, listening, reading, whatever, eventually there will be enough of those examples you've noticed that it will hopefully fossilize is the wrong word, but it will click in your mind, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and become more automatic.
It will get branded into your brain, maybe.
Branded into your brain sounds painful. Let's say click. It'll click. Yeah.
Recently, I just did a comprehensible input approach to some of our colleagues that for English learners to achieve like authentic fluency, as you mentioned, that a great amount of input is quite necessary. You have to. This is why we always focus on promoting somehow we call like immersive environments. It's difficult because all of your friends and your community use Chinese, right? So how do you replace it